It's about how hard you can get hit and keep moving forward. How much you can take and keep moving forward.
You want something, go get it, period.
You gotta keep moving, let's go. Don't quit until you got nothing left.
This is where we have been, this is how we got here, this is who we are.
Life moves pretty fast. You don't stop and look around once in a while, you could miss it.
You're listening to the Hustle Indy Show, where we seek out some of Indy's most hustling people and places to learn about what they do, how they got started, and where they're going. Sit back and enjoy the show.
What is up, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of the Hustle Indy Show. This is episode 11 of season 2. Today's cold, I'm tired, but we're grinding, getting some work done. We've got an amazing episode in this episode for you guys. Ian, what do you think about this one?
I think I made a big mistake.
Yes, you did.
So this episode will sound terrible because I forgot to hit record on our audio. So you'll listen to 50 minutes of camera audio, but it is well worth it. Very insightful into the artist world. You kind of get a perspective of what art is really like versus, you just see art hanging up and you're like, well, I have no idea how much that costs, who made it, how long it takes to make, any of that. And so just a very insightful episode into that kind of the artist world of, just his perspective on how it all works. And I was very entertained through the whole time actually just talking to him. So I think that you guys are really going to be entertained listening as well. So
this episode was, for two non-artists, we respect creativity. We are in the creative world to an extent. But just getting an inside look at Justin's insight and experience and journey through what he's doing and how he's perfected his craft and molded it to what it is today. Again, it's not the quality of the sound, it's the quality of the content.
Exactly.
This conversation, I promise you, is going to be really good. You're going to love to hear everything that he has to say, take notes, learn about logistics and all of that stuff. Forget about the audio quality. It'll be fine. You'll get over it. But this episode, man, it's super exciting. Really excited to share this with you all. Anything else?
I think we should just jump right in.
Jump right into it. Well, here we go. Well, today on the Hustle Indy Show, we've got a special guest with us, someone who has some connections with some previous guests, who's well known around the city, who's done a lot of amazing work. So we'd like to welcome Justin Vining, who is a professional artist, to the Hustle Indy Show. Justin, welcome.
Welcome.
Yeah, welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good to be here.
Yeah, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great.
Enjoying the, cold weather now.
I
flipped.
It was snowing when I got in my car this morning.
Yes.
Odd. First day of April and it's snowing.
So happy.
Yeah, gotta love it. So, tell us a little bit about what you're doing right now. What keeps you busy?
Yeah, well, I've been a full-time artist in the city now for just under 10 years.
Wow.
So I've lived off painting for that long. I just opened my first virtual exhibition ever. Obviously, due to COVID, I typically do my gallery shows with in-person openings historically, but we just did my first online release of 129 paintings.
Wow.
And that actually went really well. I did that body of work in about 80 days, so 129 paintings in 80 days. That kept me super busy, and so
That's extraordinary.
Yeah, and so that just kind of finished yesterday, and so I've got some commitments upcoming, but so that's kind of what I've been up to.
Awesome. So tell us a little backstory. Where are you from, and how did you get to the point of where you are today?
Sure. Well, I'm a farm kid from northern Indiana.
Cool.
So I grew up. We had 500 acres, corn and soybeans. Studied art education at Purdue. Was an art teacher in Pendleton, Indiana for 3 years.
Okay. Where's Pendleton?
So it's just northeast of Indy.
Gotcha.
So I lived in Fortville, then I lived in Castleton, then I lived in Broad Ripple. So even living in the city, I was able to. It wasn't really that far of a commute.
Right.
Then I quit that I love that job. I quit to go to law school with my little brother.
Really?
That was 2007 to 2010. In 2008, I started selling work in 2007 to my classmates' artwork. 2008, I started doing Facebook advertising. By the time I graduated law school in 2010, I had an online following of over 25,000 people between Facebook and Twitter. Had sold over 400 paintings all over the world and country. And was positioned so where I might be able to give this career a legitimate shot, but I did what I thought was the smart thing at the time. I passed the bar, got a job.
Wow.
The job was actually, it's kind of a whole other story, but anyways, kind of got a job on a whim. That's what brought me back to Indianapolis. I met my wife there. That was the last real job I had, and shortly after we had a brief office romance, I was just like, I'm gonna quit this job and I'm gonna be an artist. And that was the summer of 2011, and I've lived off painting since.
Wow.
And so, just to give some reference, the first 4 years, this metric is very top of mind right now because I just beat it yesterday. I didn't sell over 100 paintings in a single year until my 5th year as a full-time artist.
Wow.
And yesterday I just finished my first month where I sold over 100 paintings.
Wow.
101 paintings in March. So
wow,
milestones are meant to be broken. I'm feeling pretty good about that one.
Congratulations.
Yeah, congrats. That is awesome.
That's super cool. So going back to the beginning, what got you into art? What inspired you? How did you learn about it? What did that look like?
Yeah, being a farm kid and growing up in Indiana may not be the most artistic setting to grow up in.
Yeah, well, I grew, like in high school, I wasn't sure if farming was my future. So then it's, you kind of get to pick.
Yeah.
It's just like, well, if I'm gonna have to do a job, what does that look like? And I was like, well, if I'm gonna pick, I'm just gonna pick something fun.
Right.
And I loved my art teacher. I'm like, this guy's probably the coolest and most fun job in the world.
Yeah.
He literally just hangs out and draws and paints with kids all day. I don't know. I was like, it sounded pretty good to me.
Yeah.
And so it's also sort of the idea like those who can't teach or whatever that saying is, and it's just, I think society makes like just actually being an artist is this impossibility. It's just something that is unattainable or unachievable, and so I felt like that was never even a thought or much of an option.
Yeah.
And so I was just like, I think this sounds great, and so I went to Purdue and studied art. And what was interesting back then, I was passionate about art, but I think there was a certain level that was still just I think this would just be a great career, really fun. And it wasn't like, it's been interesting. I've been 10 years into painting daily, and I'm as addicted to painting today as I've ever been. Even when I go on vacations that are not painting trips. I mean, we did a long weekend in Nashville not too long ago that was not a painting trip, and I painted 18 paintings in 3 days.
Wow.
And so it's in me at this point. I just can't. And so I think the passion for creating, what's been interesting is I think that's something that's developed over time.
Okay.
I think the passion for art in general was always there.
Okay, cool. So then when you decided to then pursue something besides art, like law, what pushed you in that direction? Because I feel like if you look at those two on the surface, they're very different.
Yeah. What's interesting is at some level, I don't know if they're actually that different in theory, but money. I mean, the long short of it, I think my first year teaching, one of the most depressing pieces of paper that I was given was in my benefits package, just sort of like the contract and everything. There was a sheet of paper in there that gave me my salary for the next probably 35 years or 40 years until you retire.
Right.
So you can literally be like, I could become the best art teacher in the world in
still
35 years, and you're looking at that number. I mean, at that point, it's a decent number, but I mean, that's not that big of a number. And I mean, I don't know, I am a money motivated person. I think one of the things that I love most about my current career is there's no ceiling. I mean, I'm really in control of my financial future, and that to me is liberating, and it's exciting, and I find actually a lot of comfort in that.
Do you feel pressure sometimes to perform, like knowing that a lot of that rests on the shoulders of your selling, your work? Do you ever feel pressure?
What's interesting is no, and I don't know why I don't feel that pressure, but what's interesting is something that non-artists love to tell artists. It's just like, well, if you go out and paint that, you would make so much money, or if you go do this, you would make so much money, or this would be a great idea. You could do like people, and what's been interesting is really very rarely are the creating decisions what I'm deciding to paint, the subject matter. None of that is really dictated by what I actually think is going to sell or not sell. What I have found is if I just create what I want and price it accordingly, I mean, I've found success selling pretty much anything. And I don't know if you probably haven't, you don't know anything about my career, but when I started out, doing very whimsical work and really kind of almost Dr. Seuss-ish, Tim Burton-ish.
Okay, really?
And I sold that kind of work and built my entire business doing that work. And then I've done a complete pivot where now I'm doing really traditional, kind of floating between realism and impressionism, and sort of somewhere on the spectrum there. And I found success also selling that. And so I don't feel that pressure.
That's really cool.
But that said, there is that's not the only type of pressure that you can feel. I feel pressure in different ways, and I think as I've gotten more successful, I think a pressure that is very real, that is very different, is starting out in a career as an artist. I feel like you sort of put your eggs in a ton of different baskets. So I used to be doing probably 10 to 15 different types of little shows a year. And none of those shows were really that significant towards my annual revenue, but it all added up towards, so like you remove any one of those singular shows, it's not really that big of a deal. But what's been interesting is the bigger and more successful I've become, I've really controlled how and when people buy my art. And so I think of it almost like a water faucet. I turn it on and turn it off. And when it becomes easy to buy, people become decisive and make decisions. And when when it becomes harder to buy, you're almost like starving the market. So it's creating that. So what happens then is, so like leading up to this last show, I built that in 80 days, and because I was doing it online only, I actually posted almost 100% of what I made. Typically, I only post a fraction. I only give you snippets because then you want to come to the opening to see what I made, right?
Sure.
Well, that didn't happen this year, so I just decided. But then what happens is, clearly people want to buy my art. I got a lot of sales inquiry. How do I buy this painting? How do I buy this painting? And I'm actively telling people no for months. And so what then it becomes really scary because you're just like, am I a dumbass? So, like for telling people, because if people are trying to hand you money, you don't want to tell them no, especially as an artist. But at the same time, a lot of my success is because building towards a culminating moment, an opening, or virtually. And it's just like, if I'm gonna, how do you build pressure towards that opening? And I think one of my fears is if I sell all the good paintings or all the paintings that people ask about when they ask about them, when you get to this moment, it's gonna feel like the leftovers. It's gonna feel picked over. And so it's also, what was kind of interesting about that, you can see what paintings people ask about more than once. And so that actually goes into pricing strategy. The more popular paintings obviously are gonna be a little bit more expensive. But the moments before that show opened, it was scary because you just, it seems a little silly in hindsight. I knew I'd make sales. I had no idea. My previous record for a show was 84 paintings. That's still a lot. Because of COVID and online only, my personal goal was I wanted to hit 50. I expected it to be down, to be honest. In terms of the quantity, and but that pressure, that felt real.
So I want to go into a little bit about, you kind of mentioned in there about your style and how it's changed from like that Dr. Seuss style to now this realism. How does that transfer, and has there been a specific person or a specific type of art that has really inspired you to do what you're doing now, and how does that transition look like for these past 10 years or so?
Well, part of the motivation for the motivation for changing styles, it's kind of twofold, maybe threefold. But essentially the idea, you fake it till you make it. Well, I came to this abrupt realization that maybe I wasn't as good at technical painting as I thought I was. Like I never actually had real instruction. The other is when you're an artist, you're building a brand, and part of really strong brands is like cohesiveness, really. And but what scared me about that is I felt like I was becoming sort of like a one-trick pony. All of a sudden it's just I'm going down this rabbit hole, and I could be the best at that rabbit hole, but I felt like I was getting a little bit pigeonholed. And I didn't also I want to be one of the most successful artists anywhere. Especially in Indiana or the city. And I didn't want, ego saying this, but I didn't want to walk in the room with a ton of painters and be like, well, he just has that gimmick.
Yeah.
He just makes that work that looks like that and that. And so in an effort to return to the fundamentals and to actually get better at painting, I started doing observational painting, just painting, any scene, a still life, or I was doing a lot of plein air painting, going outside on location. And to me, what's interesting is artists typically try for years to develop a style. I kind of accidentally developed a style all on sort of that own, and I feel very lucky for that entire experience. And I would say now on the traditional end, what's interesting is my product, my art, it's never been more, I don't know what the right word is, like plain, maybe. Like it's sort of, there's a zillion people that paint like I do now, whereas before I was pretty much on an island.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is most people start where everyone else is
Right.
on an island.
Yeah. Right.
What I've done is I've started on an island and now I've moved where everyone else is. And the reason for that is it's simply, even though the end product is maybe more plain, the actual process of creating it is super challenging, very addicting, and super thoughtful.
Do you mind going into like the process of doing that? Because that for me is fascinating.
Sure. Well, so you talk about like physical fitness and then you talk about mental fitness. And what's interesting about like especially observational plein air painting, when you're standing on a location and you're just looking at it and you're translating it, you have to there's a lot of things that you think about over time, just like you're thinking about all the fundamentals of art, like balancing a composition and making sure that the size of everything is and the proportions are right. And just like there's all that technical aspect that has to be going, but I guess beyond that is there's a mental fitness, because now I've painted thousands of paintings, and anytime you've done something 1,000 times, it's very easy for that to become robotic and for you to go into autopilot mode. And most artists, I think, would say that at the beginning of a painting, they're making very intentional, purposeful decisions, really trying to get things accurate and but what happens though is I have to fight this all the time, is you get more into a painting and you start to go into those autopilot modes. And you start to, and I guess for me, one of the biggest challenges is to be making as intentional and as purposeful decisions at the end of a painting as I was at the beginning. And I think that's what really separates good painters from great painters, is the ability to continue to make great decisions throughout the entire creative process.
How long does that process work for, let's say, your average observational painting?
2 hours.
2 hours?
Yeah.
Really? Okay.
So, and that's a give or take, an hour to 3 hours is pretty much a window that would be safe to go. And so painting live is become one of the most addicting parts of all of it, is because I almost think of them as little Polaroids, just that you're capturing a very specific moment in time. And so especially in the Indianapolis area and the sports culture, because I have the ability to paint very quick now, and I've gotten really into painting at events.
I noticed that. I did a quick search and I saw you did was it a Colts event and then a Fever event?
Yeah.
That's
and
awesome.
So, showing up to an event like that with a blank canvas, and then at the end of the event having a finished painting that you signed, that to me is, it's addicting. It's so fun.
How did you get that lined up? How did you get those connections?
So, the first time I did a show in Speedway, Indiana, I admittedly was not a race fan at that time. They asked me to do a show on Main Street Speedway, and I was like, I would do this, but I kind of want to do it in the month of May. And beyond that, I was just like, the street will be full. Why don't we have the opening on Carb Day, which was so fun. But I wanted to paint IMS stuff. I wanted to paint the Speedway, I wanted to paint the Pagoda, I wanted to paint, the Wing and Wheel, it's right there in the roundabout, and the lawyer background in me was just like, well, I don't want to get sued. I haven't paid any type of licensing fee to the Motor Speedway, and so I just asked permission. And so when I asked permission, I was also trying to get access to the inside of the Speedway. And so it was probably 4 years ago, I was granted access to paint one day in the Speedway during a practice. and they had security, and they're just like, "Where do you want to go?" And I was just like as high up in turn one as you could get me.
Cool.
And so I straddled my easel on the stairs and the chair, like I balanced my little tripod. And I made the first painting I made at Motor Speedway was just super high on turn one. And then I went to more of a straight on shot of the pagoda that day. So I did 2 paintings that day. And just even being there for practice, that kind of was just like, this is cool. And so the next, I think it was either the next year or it might have actually been 2 years later, I was granted permission to paint during the race. And so that day, that was the first live event like that I ever painted. And I mean, I pretty much had a 12-hour window. And I mean, when I'm thinking 2-hour paintings, I'm like, I could probably do 4 to 6 paintings today. And so, I mean, I was kind of like a kid in a candy store, but also like trying to be greedy. You know, like what a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. And I ended up finishing that day with 4 finished paintings and about 4 half-finished paintings that were just, I was really trying to do too much. And so I was granted access the following year to paint again. And that year I decided I'm going to do a painting of the pagoda at sunrise, which is really is peaceful and beautiful. And then I just did 1 race painting. So I just started because I mean there's a lot of drawing involved when you're painting such a complex scene like that. And so and then that just led into other opportunities. I randomly met Tamika Catchings before her retirement, and so I painted live at her Jersey retirement. And cool. Then that led into other opportunities, and so it's been fun.
Wow. So you said kind of at the beginning that you've already been doing this full time for 10 plus years now, and you said that you didn't get burned out, and it was like it was a new thing every time, and you're still excited. What keeps you going with that sort of passion? Because doing anything for that long, most people, even if they love it in the beginning, kind of do get burnt out and don't have that spark for it. So what has kept you going, especially at such a high rate that you're still doing now? I don't know how to answer that other than it just feels like intrinsic. It truly is an addiction. What's weird is if I was to stop being a painter, I would still be addicted to painting. Like I would just probably struggle to find time to actually do it. And so what motivates me on the inside to actually do that, I think if I had to guess, there's no limit really on what you can learn, I suppose. And I think every painting is an effort to get a little bit better. And I think I feel like I'm still just scratching the surface on what my ability actually can be. And that to me it's addicting. And I think the other is just, you only become great through practice. And so I just keep at it.
How have you seen your craft be matured and perfected over the years? You've mentioned like the transition from styles. But how much or how has your style or your ability become kind of crafted, molded, and perfected into what it is today?
I mean, I would say that it's just been an evolution, I suppose. I don't know, because a question I actually get asked that I feel like parallels that idea is just like, what is my day-to-day like? And I feel like it's just so organic. I feel like everything through the years, like the evolution of my styles and the evolution of just how I conduct my business, I don't really know other than it's just been organic.
So it's more like a natural occurrence instead of something. Would you say it's more natural instead of you being like consciously making a decision to change this and this and this? So it just naturally just happens for you?
And it's just like trying to follow my heart.
Gotcha.
And it's like, and I guess feeding the addiction.
Right.
It's just, right now I'm motivated to make really small paintings. I mean, a year from now that might still be true. A year from now I might be motivated to make real big paintings. And whatever that intrinsic motivator is, I just listen to it and follow it. And
what is the average size painting you make right now?
Well, right now it's I guess probably 6 inches by 6 inches to maybe 8 by 10 on the big end. So they're small, but they're just little gems. I mean, it's so fun to break out the small paintbrushes and just really focus a lot of time, energy, and thought in a small amount of space. Whereas the biggest painting I've ever done is 20 feet wide by 40 feet tall at Butler University at Clues Memorial Hall in the lobby. And it's a different challenge and it's a different kind of fun. Painting with a mop. it's a lot different.
What?
That is kind of
so
crazy.
Cool. Has there ever been any like one particular piece or set of pieces that have really touched more than others for you personally that you've really felt a more of a connection to?
Interesting. Yeah, I guess yeah, and for years and years and years, I think a lot of artists are really reluctant and hesitant to hang their own artwork in their homes. I feel like it's just sort of like, it's like, I don't know, it just feels very
You don't want to feed your ego or something. Yeah.
And so, once I started doing observational plein air painting on location, what's interesting is I went from pretty much like 0 paintings of mine in my house to now, I mean, those are our vacation souvenirs. Because
so cool.
everywhere we go, so like the last time we were in Europe before COVID, I made a painting every day we were in Europe. And so awesome. Now our bedroom is just, I mean, there's probably at least 20, maybe 30 paintings from our travels.
That's so cool.
Yeah, so that I can't remember the original question, but I mean, I can't remember why I brought that up. Anyways, so I guess I'm excited about that aspect of it, and I feel like that also sort of fuels into the motivation of being able to paint quick and also being able to paint accurately.
Yeah, it seems like your love and passion for painting has kind of interwoven itself into your life.
Yeah.
And we're seeing that through like this, I mean, every trip you go on, you have your own personal memory that you can bring back.
Yeah.
It's just, that's so cool.
And it's interesting because we've actually talked to a couple other artists, as you know about, but we've a couple other people, and we like to ask, and it seems very relevant to you, how have you been able to, or maybe has it been a problem that it is so interwoven with your personal life? Do you feel like sometimes that like you bring work home and you're not able to focus on anything else that's important to you, or how have you been able to balance that since it is such a interwoven part of your day-to-day?
Well, my wife and I do not have kids yet, so there's a lot of freedom in schedule that way. But I am married, and so there definitely has to be work-life balance. And I think it probably was January 2015. I guess it would have been probably December and November 20. No, maybe it's 20. Anyways, like 5 years ago, I had my Harrison Center studio, and I was building my show. And when you do a high volume of paintings, like over 100 paintings in 80 days, I mean, that doesn't happen by not working. And so I was doing most of that work away from home, and I mean that was somewhat stressful in our relationship. And so that reflecting upon that, I ended up the next year, I did most of that show building at night in our attic with my wife at home. And so even though I was working, we were still in the same room.
Gotcha.
And that I think was a much healthier. And so even this last show, I have a beautiful studio and gallery, but I built a significant portion of this show at home, so I could be more in the moment with my family.
Gotcha. So being an artist, most people think, they make no money. And clearly you've been very successful doing that. So how, on the business side of things, how have you been able to cultivate that to be your full-time job, is making art? Because for a lot of aspiring artists, whether it is painting or whatever style of art, that almost seems impossible a lot of times. Yeah. So how were you able to do that on the business side of things?
Sure. Well, the last real job I had after law school, before becoming a full-time artist, it was as a corporate headhunter at a company called Protus here in Indianapolis, and I was only there 7 months. But that 7 months, I learned a ton about data-driven selling. And so that organization had an internal sales document our team did. It was called our hot sheet, and that was really all the data that drove our business forward. And so when I quit that job, I took that hot sheet and I turned it into my business. And so for 10 plus years now, or I guess 10 years now, I've collected all my sales data, and so everything from, it's not anything overtly complex other than just like the size of the work, the price of the work, how long it took me to sell the work. And then I break down metrics within that, like the average price per square inch.
Right.
And it kind of goes so on and so forth. And I compare and contrast what sells and what doesn't sell. In the last 3 years, I've been capturing market data. And so I've been putting my competition shows into my hot sheet. And so now I have a database of over 2,000 paintings by 100 different painters in this city, and just creating a very simple trend line off of where does the price and size combination sell versus the price and size combination to not sell.
Yeah.
And so it becomes incredibly informative. And so like a great example of this show I just had, the sales, people have to show up. So, there's so many things on the PR and the marketing side and getting people excited about my brand and what I'm doing that has to happen to get people to show up.
Sure.
But they're also, there's a whole different strategy on the pricing, on the pricing equation. And so essentially, I could geek out on this for hours.
Yeah, that was actually kind of my next question is how do you price a painting? So.
Yeah, well, so I would say a very simple starting out, like early career artist, it's where do people give you money? And then where do people give you money who are not your friends and family repeatedly?
Yeah.
And so you can reverse engineer success off of that.
Okay.
And so what's interesting is I feel like I'm a professional artist that doesn't necessarily live in the art world. I don't try to compete with the higher echelons of my competition. I'm an artist who thinks of my job as a 9-to-5, and I'm an artist that lives in the real world. And so if I had just had any random hourly job that was, minimum wage or somewhere above minimum wage, and my boss was just like, Justin, part of your daily 8-hour duties is for 2 hours, you have to make a painting, which I'm very capable of doing, that would be the easiest part of my day. And so most of my competition price those 2-hour paintings anywhere from $400 to $1,200 to the most expensive artist in the city is at $4,500. So I've literally painted paintings side by side where mine is 225 to 240, maybe 300, and his are more than 10 times the price of mine.
Wow.
So we're not even competing with the same buyer.
Right.
And so for me, what I was really trying to do is brand is a very important component to most artists' career, but I think there's also 2 other components that I think are less talked about, and it is the actual price of the work, but it's also the quality of the work. And so when I had the window in a gallery in Broad Ripple for over a year, I only sold 1 painting out of that window, but I sold 97 other paintings I think that year at the same prices.
Yeah.
And what I really discovered was the artwork didn't sell itself, which Dan Thompson was actually talking about in your podcast. And so that actually really, it made me ask why. And because I think there was a disconnect between the quality of the work on his face and the price of the work. And me, when I'm talking and selling you guys, I could close that gap through communicating my reputation, my excitement, my passion, all that stuff is converting to sales. I'm selling, right?
Yeah.
And then, so I wanted to really truly understand where, if you take my reputation and my brand out of it, where does the work sell itself? And so I reverse engineered all the way back to where does the work sell myself? And so what happened was the first show where I priced it like that, I think we sold 71 or 72 paintings on opening night. And all of a sudden you're like, because for me now, my strong reputation in the market and brand is icing on the cake. And so I've still continued to build my entire pricing strategy based upon where do people impulse buy my work. Because for me, I'm not really famous yet. I can go into any restaurant or bar pre-COVID on Mass Ave. Those people don't have my art. Those people don't know who I am.
Right.
But if you're on a weeknight, spending $60 on dinner and a cocktail, you can afford my $100 to $200 painting. And so for me, I've found a lot of freedom really being very patient with building the price of my work. And so for me, I still feel like even though I'm 10 years in, I'm still just building the foundation. And I'm really just trying to build strength. And the way that I build strength is not through increasing the price of my work as my brand increases. It's by increasing how much of my work is out there. And so my pricing strategy still really reflects that. And so I could actually go into even more, I could go into layers of that. But in short, it's figuring out where do people give me money for my work without knowing who I am.
Yeah, that's really cool.
So when it comes to, you kind of mentioned it, when it comes to competition or the art scene, and we've already talked to a couple different artists and creatives, and there's definitely in Indianapolis there is a community around that. So how has Indianapolis played a role in the art community for you? And if there is outside of Indianapolis, like what is the art community like for those from the outside?
Yeah, that's really interesting question. First, I definitely use the word competition, but I actually really truly believe in the idea we're stronger together. And I think what's happening in Indianapolis as a whole in the art scene with all these different sort of pockets of arts related things happening, I think that really serves to benefit all of us. And I feel lucky to be in Indianapolis right now because I think, I know I've been doing this for 10 years now, which is a while, but I mean, there were people doing this for the 10 years prior to me. And I'm personally benefiting from even those people's, efforts and perseverance and their successes, because I think, as we all grow and as our city grows, I just think there's just a lot more opportunity for everyone. And I think there's a lot of good that's happening because of that. And so, but I guess from, I don't have a lot of experience in other markets. I've been internally focused on Indianapolis since the September of 2012 for other reasons. But I have been actively showing and exhibiting and recruiting artists to exhibit here. And I have a really good friend who's a national painter working with some of the best galleries in the country out of Grand Rapids, Michigan. And he's participated in a few and come down for a few of the First Friday things down here. And what's interesting is Art Prize happens in Grand Rapids, which is one of the biggest art shows in the entire country. But what is interesting about that is it's playing at this like super high level contemporary, but what I think we have going on here in Indianapolis is it feels very grassroots, and it feels like there's a lot of opportunity for not just early career artists, but even artists like him, who obviously he has a great resume and reputation, but he feels like he's on a little bit of an island in Grand Rapids, whereas I know I am somewhat on an island now that I have my own studio gallery on the east side, but I don't feel like I'm on an island at all. I feel like there's just a big community of artists that are super supportive of one another. And I mean, even, leading up to my show, I had an artist friend who had an opening on the same night, and a small group of us artists, social distance, critiqued her show and, gave her pricing strategy, and her show was incredibly successful. And then just a couple days later, one of those same artists came and curated and hung my entire show. And so even though there wasn't an in-person opening, I wanted I personally wanted to see all the work hung up. And so anyways, I just feel like we have a very supportive community here.
So go ahead. No, go ahead.
Well, I was gonna say, I going back to the word just competition, and sometimes that has like a negative undertone. Well, I think for me, I mean, I'm just trying to obviously be as successful as I can, but I think there's a lot of information to be gathered, and a lot can be learned just by seeing where other people are being successful and where other people are falling short. And by paying attention to that and analyzing it, it helps me, price my work even more accurately.
That's awesome. So seeing all of the development happening in Indianapolis, all of the buildings going up, infrastructure, the whole facade of Indianapolis is changing. What, from your perspective, do you see the future of the arts community looking like? The artists that are here local that you know of, what do you guys foresee the future looking like?
That's interesting. In a broad way, I see our art community just becoming stronger and stronger and stronger. And I think there is, even just seeing what happened between the partnership with the Sports Corp and the Indianapolis Arts Council, I think there was 980,000, and not just visual arts activations, but all types of art activation around the city for March Madness. And that type of money, I didn't participate in any of that, but I directly benefit on an ancillary just because, when somebody else gets stronger, we all get stronger. And so that type of money and having, the Lilly Endowment here in Indianapolis, I sort of operate outside of that world a little bit, but I definitely, on an ancillary, I benefit from it. So I think I continue to see Indianapolis becoming stronger and stronger and stronger, but the way that I see my role in helping do that is I am at this point connected fairly well in sort of my little tiny corner of the art world, sort of this landscape, traditional landscape plein air world. I mean, the art world is infinitely broad. I mean, you could like designers, musicians, the visual art world is also, I mean, you have contemporary art, you have abstract artists, you have representational artists, you have realism, you have impressionism. There's all these sort of subcultures within the culture, and I would say in my tiny little corner of the art world, I am getting fairly well connected nationally. And so what I've really learned over the years, it is very hard to establish yourself somewhere else. Like it's easier for me to become very relevant in Indianapolis because it's where I live. It'd be very hard for me to do this in Cincinnati, living in Indianapolis. I'm not making those daily connections. I'm not meeting you guys. I'm not, and so it just got me reflecting. It's like, well, if I'm not going to establish myself somewhere else, I still want to network with these people elsewhere. How do you do that? And I think part of the way that I'm actively doing that is by, I bought a building with my little brother. I'm opening, a studio gallery space that I don't plan on having retail hours or keeping it like a traditional gallery, but I do plan on hosting massive group exhibits where I bring in some of the best painters in the country. And we've already done this 3 times. I did it once at Butler University. My buddy Benny hosted it once at the Harrison Center, and then I just hosted in September the first annual Vining Gallery Invitational Group exhibit. And I mean, it's some of the best painters in the country sending paintings to East 10th Street over here. And what was cool is in preparation for that show, a lot of those artists had never even exhibited work in Indianapolis. I created, using all this math and data, I created a 9-page market assessment with all these graphs and charts. And I essentially was just transparent. I was like, you sell nationally, your prices are XYZ with all these major galleries, you can keep your prices the same, but here's where people give you money for your work in Indianapolis, and just breaking it down even percentages, this size to price ratio, if you have that combination, you have a 70% chance of selling, above that line, it immediately drops to like 38, and then you go even above that, and it's just like this, price to size ratio has only a 13% chance of converting, and if you see like just even the math, like you're like, well, if I just lower it $50, it increases the chance of selling by almost half. It's like, why wouldn't I do that? And so I gave the artists probably tools that they had never been given by a gallery before to make more informed decisions to position themselves for actual success. And so we ended up with national level artists. We sold 40 paintings out of that show. And I mean, in COVID, we did do a tiny little social distance opening. It wasn't private, but it was almost private. And I mean, I feel like that was, I felt like that was a tremendous success for sort of that test of what it was. And I feel like now that I've done that, once in my own space, I plan on doing that more, obviously.
That's super cool. Do you feel like that kind of math and logistics side of art is something that a lot of people aren't aware of?
Yeah, well, I think so. I think they are, but I think they're not. And I think so. What's interesting about being an artist in the art world is there is this idea that a market exists for art, and what happens is most artists, when they get to a certain quality threshold, or even early on, they try to insert themselves into that artwork, and they try to compete with the artist. And so a lot of times their pricing, and I mean, I don't do this, but I mean, if you were to put 10 of my paintings along the wall and then 10 of someone else's that are $1,200, like 10 of these are $200, 10 of these are $1,200. Art is so subjective. You could show a panel of 10 people and the range would be everywhere. No one would know, right? And so because of that, a lot of the early career artists just try to sneak right up into that. And they do not find success because they're lacking on that brand and reputation side, right?
Gotcha.
And so, anyways, I have a question that fits right into this conversation I want to ask. So a lot of people, when they think of art, is like, oh, they see a banana on the wall and they're like, oh, that sells for millions of dollars, right, or whatever. Or they see, this, they go into a museum and they look at it, that is just a gray square that is selling for $1.3 million. What the heck is art? Art is stupid. I'm walking away. Like, artists, they don't know what they're doing. Like, I'm not going to buy this gray canvas for $1 million. So where do you see that disconnect from, like, the public eye and, like, artists creating stuff? And how do you bridge that gap between, like,
like you just said, art is subjective, but it also has to be like realistic for like if you're trying to get people's attention to buy your art. So how do you bridge that gap?
Yeah, well, I think there's for no quick solution to bridging that gap. I think by bridging that gap, you do things slowly over years. And I think, I mean, a great place that I believe is bridging that gap in a very, not passive is the wrong word. I mean, they're active, but is the Harrison Center for the Arts. That's where my art studio was for 6 years. And just by, I mean, essentially showing up and hosting 5 different exhibits every month for probably almost 20 years now, it's making art more accessible. And because of that, I think it's bridging that gap. And so over time, I don't know if there's ever a way to bridge a gap between, because I mean, I even think that stuff sometimes, you know, because I think there's a huge difference between the reality of where I am and even the reality of where the best painters in the city are, the most expensive ones. There's an ocean between them and, you know, the $1 million. I mean, at that super high echelon, at that point, I mean, I feel like, I mean, for the most part, it is just truly asset management. I mean, those people are just investing money. And it happens to be art, you know? Whereas I feel like all of us are so far below that. I mean, there's some people, but I would say there's a less amount of people buying my work because they think it's going to be worth millions of dollars versus, you know, I paint a lot of Indianapolis scenes, you know, they're just like, oh my gosh, that's the park we take our dog to every day. Like, you know, I want that in our bathroom or our living room, or I want to look at that all the time.
That's super cool. So for you, in your foreseeable future, are there any aspirations, goals, or achievements that you want to personally achieve between now and the next foreseeable future?
So foreseeable future, like, I mean, even within the next 6 months, I've been really patient with COVID to not make plans. Obviously, so we didn't really talk about this, but I bought a building 2.5 years ago with my little brother. We spent a year building it out, and I want to host events. I've found a lot of success selling, you know, with sort of that event-driven model. So I want to host openings, I want to host workshops, I want to teach out of the space. I would say those are still somewhat short-term goals, but I think something that I haven't achieved yet that is definitely maybe more on the middle ground is, I mean, I think the business model that I'm finding success with in the art world is very replicable. Like, I feel like it's very teachable, but I think it takes a few things that most people just don't want to do. Work hard and persevere. But I feel like with the right artists, I would love to mentor, you know, and help other artists be successful, and successful enough to live off what they do. I don't know if that'll ever happen. I mean, I think it takes the right person or people, but who knows? I mean, that's something I would definitely be interested in doing.
Yes, well, if you're wanting to be a mentor, I'd love for you to give, if you have one piece of advice for these young artists coming up and that are trying to make it in this art world. They want to do this full time, they want this to be like their income, they're passionate about it, they just don't know how to make it their life. What would be your one piece of advice to them?
Work as hard as you can to make the best possible art as you can. But beyond that, I would just say, you know, keep the gas pedal down and persevere. Because I mean, I feel like success is a combination of grit and perseverance. You know, and it's you know, I'm 10 years down the road because I've fought real hard. You know, and I mean, there's certainly been struggles, and I think fighting through those, learning from them, you know, reflecting upon them, and moving forward. I mean, that's, I would just say keep going.
That's awesome. That's super cool. So for someone listening to this episode or watching it, how can they get a hold of you? How can they see your art, learn more about what you're doing?
I mean, I'm on all of the social platforms. I have a website, but I would say Instagram is definitely the best way to keep in touch. Awesome. Just my name.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on the Hustle Indy Show. We appreciate your time.
Absolutely.
Appreciate your wisdom. Appreciate all of that. We thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.
Of course.
Thank you. Thank you guys for watching. We look forward to seeing you all in another episode of the Hustle Indy Show.